Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much, Eula, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I'm not sure I'm going to extend my thanks for having to follow Brian, but I'll do my best. I'm struggling with a pair of comedy spectacles today, so please forgive me if I keep looking at my notes. I'll start with an existential question. Why am I here? Why is somebody from the Scottish Government here? And Iarla touched on that. We had a very interesting day yesterday, meeting colleagues from government and from the local authority, and above all, going out into the communities to see some of the group water schemes in practice. We don't have group water schemes in Scotland, but we do have a lot of rural private water supplies, so we are very concerned to understand potential solutions to some of the problems that we have, and I'll touch on that as I go through my presentation. There's a lot that Brian has said that resonates very, very strongly with me in terms of the potential out there in communities, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. I'm going to tell you a bit about Scotland, so there'll be a kind of shameless marketing plug at some point. I'll tell you a little bit about the history of Scottish Water and how we've got to where we are. And I say we, I work for government, and I should stress, of course, that government is separate from Scottish Water. It is a wholly owned public utility, and it is accountable to ministers, but it runs as an independent business, and a very successful one at that, largely because we keep our paws off it. And I think that's a really important lesson. I think ministers would agree with that, actually. I don't think I'm going to get into too much trouble, but don't tell them I said that. So, in terms of the rural dimension in Scotland, I will make the quote, I will say that the world is rural. It's not strictly true. Most people don't live in rural environments, but the majority of the landmass around the world is rural. We've all got connections to the rural environment. And you know, I've seen some beautiful countryside down here in County Mayo. And it's a key commitment within the Scottish Government's programme for government, which is essentially their plan for Scotland, how they're going to deliver their policies across the country. And that commitment is growing a productive, sustainable economy, and that includes the rural economy. And building growth across all areas of the economy is absolutely critical to delivering on that commitment, and is a priority amongst many others. And that really means maximising economic and social opportunity. And when you set out your stall to do that, you must recognise that you have to deliver that commitment to rural communities as well as urban communities. And that's why we're funding support for projects like Recent, because it's a key part of understanding the actions that communities can take that will make them stronger and more resilient and able to resist the pressures of modern life that are breaking up so many communities. They need opportunities, they need support, and they need help. And resilience has become a bit of a buzzword recently, certainly in Scotland, but I think it's not one to shy away from. I like the sound of a resilient community, that one that can withstand those pressures and has the skills within the individuals who live in that community to respond to the kinds of challenges they face, and water supply is one of them. And also our rural communities, it's important to say, are particularly important to the Scottish Government, because traditionally, before just about everybody voted for them, they drew the mainspring of their support really from the rural environment. They drew, their heartland really was in Aberdeenshire and up in the fishing industry, but in the rural and outlying communities, people who feel disconnected, I think, from government in Edinburgh. So for my government and its administration, it's extremely important area, but it also hosts some of our really important industries in Scotland. We are an agricultural nation by and large. We talk about the knowledge economy, but the bedrock of the economy is also involved in food and drink and agriculture and those sorts of areas. Tourism, of course, all of which are connected to the rural economy, and of course fisheries. So a genuinely sustainable economy needs to be able to tackle, as I said, social inclusion issues, and to develop and support opportunities for the people that live there. And there's a lot of research, international research now, that's showing more and more that inequality within a country can lead to poor economic performance, and none of us want that. And therefore, economic resilience is an important part of the mix for any government that's looking to strengthen its economy. So we've got a lot of reasons to be interested in the rural economy and the rural environment. So let me proceed to see if I can get the technology to work. I should say that, so I work in Water Industry Division within an Environment and Forestry Directorate in government. We're a really small team. There's, I think, 6 of us at the moment, and our job is essentially twofold. We are a bulwark between ministers and Scottish Water, and we are a conduit for information both ways. We administer and manage the process of ministerial direction to Scottish Water that serves the vast majority of the people in Scotland with drinking water and wastewater services. The other side of our work is supporting the supply chain, which is developed up around having a large single utility, and developing a water economy. And my responsibility as a hydronation manager is actually in that latter part of what I've just described. In short, my job is to maximise the value of all of our water resources. So it's pretty tall order, and that means everything from the raw material itself, through to the assets that we have on the network, through to the people who work with those assets, and thinking about how water plays into our national identity and therefore is a part of how we sell Scotland as a destination. We want to be seen as a country with good water, obviously, and with lots of lakes, or as we say lochs, I think you say lochs too, that people can come and enjoy. We want to make sure that they remain pristine and that people respect them. So my job is just basically just do all of that. But as the First Minister said, in quite more prosaic terms, he just just do what you're doing, but do more of it. We've got a track record of success, but we're not complacent. So, picture my house to start with. Here we go. So, a bit of a story of Scottish Water, and then I'll explain what hydronation is in a little bit more detail. So we have a recent history which is now being paralleled to some extent by what's happening with the establishment of Irish Water. Public corporation established 14, 15 years ago now, which was formed out of 3 regional water authorities, each with each with very different geographies, but each of them had lots of mountains, lots of hills, lots of rural properties, lots of coastline, but even while they had those common elements, they were all very different, and in many ways different culturally and socially as well. So there were a lot of pressures on individual companies in terms of the relative performance, and essentially it was driven by equity. It wasn't right that somebody who lives, let's say lives in Lerwick, wasn't getting the same level of service or quality of water of somebody living in Dundee. And ministers said, well, that's not right. Everybody should be getting a uniform and uniformly high level of service. So there were also pressures, commercial pressures from water companies down in England, knocking on the door saying we could come up and do it better than you guys. So there was a commercial imperative to resist that, because the Scottish Government has bought into the public ownership model very strongly. So for a number of reasons, we brought together. And the state of the nation today is that Scottish Water serves about 2.4 million households. We've got a total population of just under 5.3 million, give or take. And of that, the vast majority are connected to the network. But that means that some aren't. And just to give you some ideas about the numbers there, I'll chuck another few numbers at you, which may help to contextualise it. Scotland has 70% of the UK's surface area of water, and about 90% by volume, so we've got a lot of it. Most of it will fall on you at some point. Loch Ness alone has nearly twice the amount of water, standing water, that England and Wales have, so that's just one loch. So we've got, we don't have a water quantity issue. Sometimes we can have too much of it in the wrong place rather than too little. We've removed the word drought from our legislation. We don't, but I'm absolutely serious, we don't believe that's a realistic proposition. We can have shortages in certain locations, but we don't see drought as a realistic proposition in a country with such a huge water resource. As you can see, we've got a huge coastline and we've got a lot of islands, and I can't remember the number of islands off the top of my head, but it is a lot, and they are often populated quite sparsely, and is a real issue in terms of water supply, because the largest population in many of the islands has 4 legs and a woolly coat, and they produce quite a lot of waste which slips into the water course. So that journey from 3 regional companies to 1 national body has led to a reduction in costs overall for consumers of around 40 to 42%. So people are paying far less now for their water than they were 12 or 15 years ago, and there are not many utilities or services you can say that of. And the total number of savings, to remind myself of the figure, is that we did that well. About £2.5 billion have been saved, and household bills are now about £105 lower than we think they would have been on average if we hadn't made the efficiencies and changes in operating practice and management, and improved procurement is actually where we've made some of our biggest gains. So those economies of scale, developing strong framework contracts and driving the price down for the consumer at the end of the day, because it's about the consumer. It's a good service at a good price and all of that. We've got about 113, give or take, reservoirs, maybe not a massive number for a country of our size, 70,000 odd acres of water catchment, 256 treatment works, many of them through an upgrade programme, quite similar to one you showed, Brian, with an integrated turbine, bit of solar on there. I'll say a little bit more about how successful Scottish Water has been at generating its own power. It has an ambition to be a net exporter of electricity. It's the largest single electricity user in Scotland as it is, so there's a real pressure there, not only from climate change drivers, but from cost considerations to drive that down, and we have a target to generate all of our own electricity within the next 2 years, and we're well on track with that, and then to start exporting, and then work on other parts of the energy mix as well. There's about 30,000 miles of water pipe and a little bit more of sewerage pipe across the country in various states of repair, mostly pretty good, massive ongoing capital investment and upgrade programme, which is done on like a 5-yearly cycle. So we'll get to all of it eventually, but there's always going to be a problem on your network. There are 1,800 odd wastewater treatment plants across Scotland, and they range from quite shiny new Glencorse in Edinburgh, which generates all its own industry, to small plants of the type that you saw in Brian's slide, halfway up a mountain. So there are plenty of those as well. So it's a real mix, and the quality of the water is good in Scotland. We are very fortunate, and I think one of the things that I have in common in Ireland is that we always say if we had an absolute disaster and couldn't use the network, there are any number of lochs we could go to and actually just run a pipe off the loch. It would be safe to drink. So talking of safe to drink, I need a thanks very much. So we're in a very fortunate position, I think. But it is a big network and it is over difficult terrain. We've had leakage issues. We've reduced our leakage by about 50% over the last 10 years. That is quite a good efficiency rate, and we've reduced the number of environmental pollution incidents by 30%. So it's been a process of tightening and getting better. We think we've done quite well. and as I mentioned, a massive investment, about £50 million at the moment, to try and generate, develop more renewable energy assets. Scottish Water owns a lot of land, so we act, doing the we thing again, the royal we. So that land is used for turbines, so that might be a third party who's coming onto our land, paying a rent, or withdrawing power in a mutual agreement from them. So plenty of that going on, and some hydro as well on some of our sites. And very interesting what you were saying, Brian, about inline generation. This is something that we do quite a lot of in Scottish Water. We don't talk about it nearly enough for some obscure reason, possibly because as a company, Scottish Water wants to maintain its focus on public service, and sometimes issues like innovative energy generation might be seen as being a distraction, but in fact they're serving the customer base, because it's driving down costs. So we have a number of large-scale energy differential projects where simply you reduce the diameter of the pipe to increase the pressure, stick a turbine in it, draw the energy off it. There are a number of these projects underway. There's one in Denny, which is near Falkirk, and that's powering about 450 homes. That's providing all of their energy needs. So there's loads of potential on your network. We're bringing on some of those other large-scale energy, DifGen we call it, bring on some of those other large-scale projects over the next few years. But there's no reason why you can't do it at a smaller scale. The technology is there, it's tried and tested, and it's definitely the way to go, we think. Clean, green, and not very mean. Right. So hydronation, let me say a bit, I need to give hydronation a mention because this is the policy programme that I manage, and it's really the reason I'm here today. And it's quite an interesting policy. I guess the key thing is we placed a duty on our ministers to do certain things, to manage the water environment in a sustainable and reasonable way. Nobody's challenged ministers yet on whether they're meeting their duty, but obviously the pressure is on me as civil servant to show how they are. So we have a kind of programmed approach, we have a strategy that sets out a range of activities and actions that we're going to take, and we're measured against that by reporting annually to Parliament in the Hydronation Annual Report, very creative title, which sets out the work that we've been doing and the progress that's being made. That's the ministers are called to account on it. I think that we've been lucky in the sense that while Scottish Water is a success and there have been no issues or any major outbreaks, actually pressure's off, nobody's really looking at us that closely. So we're aware of that, we're not complacent about it, but reporting nationally and placing that report in Parliament is a really important step, and it's available should you wish to read it on the website, which I'll give you the address for later. So we've created this concept of Scotland as a hydro nation. It's not a brilliant title, I didn't make it up, but essentially we're trying to define Scotland as one that has a particular approach to the way in which it manages its water environment. And it's partly because we can raise our international profile around that, but it's partly largely because in meeting that definition, you're responsibly managing your resource. Regardless of how much you've got of it, you have a duty to manage your resources responsibly. And the Scottish Government very much believes it needs to act as a responsible nation in the world, which I think is right. I've got no issues or problems with buying into the philosophy whatsoever. But also there's a sense of duty that we should take our knowledge and expertise and share it with others and learn from others where we can. And I've been very much on a learning mission here in Mayo in the last couple of days. So we have an international programme as well, which I will touch on. The key activities of the programme, I should say, falls under the oversight of something called the Hydronation Forum, which is made up of academic experts, industry experts, and chaired by our Cabinet Secretary. So that gives it a bit of clout. That means people turn up. I think the Cabinet Secretary is going to be in the chair. That's one way of guaranteeing your board members will actually be there, because we all want to get her ear at some point. We are strong believers in innovation and innovation research and the development of our knowledge base in water. We put a lot of money into that. We've established something called the Centre for Scotland's Centre of Expertise for Waters, or CREW. And as part of that, have developed what I believe is a unique programme. I keep saying it's unique until somebody says, no, it isn't. We directly fund the PhD scholarship programme for a 4-year scholarship, which is looking at a range of water issues identified by industry and government. So it's not just a government plaything. We invite the industry in, invite the regulators in. We have a discussion annually about what are the issues that are coming up on the horizon, where do we need to do some detailed research, where's the gap, identify those areas, then invite proposals to come forward. And I'm delighted that one of our scholars, Kirsty Halstead, is here today somewhere. There she is up at the back, who is looking at community issues in relation to water management. So part of the small but perfectly formed Scottish delegation that's visiting there. So that's part of what we do. Some of the other activities are mentioned there, and we do some international outreach work, particularly in Malawi, where Scotland has a historical connection, Dr. Livingstone and all of that, and in India, which happily is my responsibility. I get to go to India and work with the Indians, where we are acting as a bridge for Scottish technology and academic knowledge to help with the Ganga cleanup problem. Huge challenges in India, but also huge opportunities for Scotland as well. But we're learning it's a two-way street. Again, we're not just going and doing things to people, we're going to do things with people. I mentioned innovation. We've got a hydronation water innovation service. We've got, in the last about 18 months, we've opened 2 what we call development centres. One a wastewater treatment development centre, and the other one a drinking water development centre, where companies or academics can bring their kit or their processes and test them on an as-live network. It's open for business, and Irish businesses and government departments very welcome to come across and use those facilities at a very competitive rate, I might add. But again, that's part of what we've been doing to support our businesses, but we're very open to kind of collaborative arrangements whereby you may have similar facilities here and we can maybe do a bit of mutual back scratching, but it's something to bear in mind. So just to give you a flavour of the range of things that we're doing. But we have our own challenges in Scotland as well, and rural provision, as I said, is one. That's that small percentage of people who live in rather tricky terrain, tricky areas. It is an ongoing challenge for us, and one that we need to tackle. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of what that looks like. There are something like 20,000 private water supplies in Scotland, so there are really a large number of them, hugely dispersed, and just under 92% of them are compliant. So even the huge majority of those private supplies are perfectly good, no real issues. But they're almost all rural, almost all miles from the main, they're almost all through difficult terrain. They're almost always halfway up a hill. I joked yesterday saying that in many of those cases it would make more sense for civil servants in the department to hire a gold-plated Rolls Royce, fill it up with the most expensive bottled water you could find from the Pyrenees, and drive it up to those people every day. It would make more sense than actually connecting them to a pipe, because the pumping costs, the connection costs, they're just astronomical, and they are beyond what any household could buy, and they are beyond what is considered reasonable under the regulations for Scottish Water to have to bear. So there is a real issue for us. How can you take all that into consideration and still, on balance, deliver a really good service to those people who deserve it? So that's the kind of conundrum that we face in government, and that's part of the reason for this study visit. So we divide those supplies into two types: Type A or Type B. Type A being the larger ones. These are commercial, hotels, bed and breakfast, possibly schools, and Type B supplies, which are the smaller ones. And to say something like 2,500 are Type A supplies, so 17,700, 800 of Type B. So that just gives you a sense of the mix. And the concern is that if it is a hotel in a rural area and it's got a dodgy supply, and that some of our visitors get ill, God forbid, that's a real issue for us. No, it's a public health issue for the people who live there, but there's a wider potential economic hit for Scotland that adds to the drivers to do something about it. And so those shortcomings in quality are an ongoing concern for us. They're regulated by local authorities, of which there are 32 in Scotland. That's a rather fractured group at the moment. Some are easier to deal with than others, but they have enforcement powers. They don't tend to flex those enforcement powers. They've got an issue about having enough personnel to go out and inspect. There's challenges there because of austerity and having to manage all of their services. So that's had an impact on the amount of inspection that's getting done. But they have that role, and there's an independent drinking water quality regulator, which is also part of our governance framework. And they have a supervisory role to monitor the local authorities, monitor overall compliance progress across the whole country, direct improvement, and provide ideas for how you do that, technical support and advice, and help local authorities make decisions on their grants. So there's an improvement grant of £800 per household that's available from local authorities for upgrade work. So there's a flat fee, flat amount, which is maybe not the way to go, but anyway, that's the current situation. And around 94% of these private supplies have been assessed so far, so we've got a good idea of what kind of upgrade work is required for them, but there's still 6% to go, and it's going to be one of those 6%, isn't it, that's going to have the problem. So we need to get our skates on. So that trying to give you a picture of what that water environment looks like. We do a lot on supporting communities in terms of energy generation, working alongside Scottish Water on private wire agreements, some quite creative arrangements being developed there. Still work to be done. Learned a lot yesterday. I mean, one of the issues that we've had is that the community groups don't necessarily have the skills. They're not terribly well networked between each other. So lots for me to pick up here today. I said how good the quality of water is, and Brian yesterday at a meeting we had was emphasising you've really got to understand your raw water quality. So you need to be sampling that, really understanding what you've got in your water. We think most of what we've got in our water is pretty good, but it's not always great. And you recognise these kind of private supplies. It's very typical of Scotland, and I'm sure very typical of Ireland. This is really my favourite here of the sheep. He's perfectly poised to deliver his latest message right down the chute of the private supply. That sort of thing you see all the time. As Brian pointed out, very simple measures could really improve that. Stick a fence up, for goodness sake. So, fairly typical sort of rural Scottish scene there. And sometimes you find strange things when you look in the water as well. So that's my address. The government website address, there's lots of stuff on there under hydronation, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'll be milling around later on. Thank you.